Now Ginger, and this is gonna get a little off subject, but Ginger seems to really throw her type. Like, I've noticed that between Frosty and Gruffalo.
Yeah.
They have very similar phenotypes, and those are from 2 different breedings, and they match her almost identically.
Hmm.
I mean, and she was very impressive. I remember seeing her, and I was like, "Ooh, okay, that you know, that's a dog I could get behind." And now it going back when we were talking about it earlier with the females and them producing consistently and having that ability to do so, it seems like that could be an important component for you that she has been what she
She's stayed
has.
at
Now,
this
is she going
point.
to be bred again or is
It's
she
funny
done?
with her because she produced super super males, but I I kept two females off of her, and neither one of them was worth a damn, which is really odd. Yeah.
Yeah, I've experienced that too. Sugar was a dog that I owned that was just she didn't throw a lot of females, weirdly enough, and but not until later did she actually throw a couple females. I basically kept every female that I had off her
Hmm.
because there was so few, and then I washed out quite a few of them. I've got 2 now. One will definitely be bred, and the other one I ke I kinda keep going back and forth because she's just a very, very, very bully dog, but for a very, very, very bully dog, she's got great structure. She's not huge, but Sugar wasn't huge either,
Yeah.
but man, her underbite is like, ooh-wee. I mean, I was reading the old ABA standard the other day in a magazine, and it said like an eighth to a quarter inch, and I was like, can we
Yeah.
put an inch in front of the quarter? Because that's about where
Yeah.
she
Frosty's got a
lives.
good underbite too.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, and that to me, I mean, I don't it's a bulldog breed. It's not the end of the world. I know some people get really hung up on teeth, and having all their teeth and having big teeth. Is that something you consider when you're
I mean, it's
breeding for
nice.
working that they have big
But
teeth?
most of our dogs have decent sized teeth. Every once in a while you get one with the little chiclet incisors and stuff, and we every once in a while they'll be missing. It's interesting because on line breeding on the stuff, I've noticed that every once in a while, more than I've seen before, we'll be missing one of the molars. Um, but you know, it's
Mm,
always nice for the biting. But then again, like thinking about on dogs throughout the history, recent history. Um, little Trina Mitchell's old dog Bunker, he had little bitty teeth, but that little bastard could come on a long bite and like nail it every time. So I guess it's one of those, the heart of the dog makes up for having little teeth sometimes. But now most of the time these days we have nice, good
yeah.
sized canines. I think a lot of that came through. Alex had huge canines, and rolling in them too. I mean, we saw a little bit more chiclet teeth down in like pumpkin and think what Rise's teeth look like. I think in the blizzard stuff, the blizzard some.
The pumpkins, yeah, well, if yeah, the daily side of it, I mean, and that's kinda where I live, so I'm always missing a molar on one side or the other, and, I've never really given teeth a ton of thought outside of
Yeah.
just I like a nice square bite, some dogs, um, like Annie, which was a dog off Rachel, and it was inbred on Bronco, she does not throw nice teeth.
Hmm.
The the front teeth are curved. They're never that straight, nice bite. And her teeth are pretty jacked up too. But the pup that I kept off of her, I was hoping they were going to straighten out, but they're not. But it's not a thing that I would wash a dog out of my program for because she's got round teeth. But I mean, I I think the quest for the perfect dog is something that you kind of have to
Yeah.
let go and you use everything as a tool. Um, with that being said, how did when you're trying to evaluate adult breed stock, what are some things that will immediately wash a dog out? What are some things that, or how much does it take for you to say? I mean, you have quite a few dogs, so I mean, you have the ability to keep that many dogs, so you have a little bit more flexibility with being a little bit more particular. But what's your pecking order, and how much does it take to get a dog out of the
Temperament would be a
program?
good one. I mean, weird shyness, that's going to be usually a hard cull. I mean, I have a lot of dogs here that will never be bred, or I have no plans on breeding. Um, I mean, for a long time I hadn't bred Nomad, and that just wasn't because he wasn't a nice dog. It just the I had Roman, and like the type of your head was kind of what I was going for. And then we recently used him just because I wanted to get closer back up to that old stuff, and I've been really happy with those puppies. But Harper, I could never get his hips to pass, and he was out. Shoot, who's his dad? I'm drawing a blank right now. But his mom was from our stuff, and shoot, who's Harper's dad? Do you remember? I can't.
I'll get the I was gonna say, I'll when I edit this
But
thing,
anyway,
I'll put the pedigrees in so
yeah,
that we can all see it. You don't need to
yeah.
remember
But
everything.
he was
The
just.
power of
I
the
think it was
internet.
because he was so muscular. Like when he tried to move his hips into the proper position, he always just got subluxation. So, that was part of the reason I didn't use him, but it wasn't the whole reason. He was just a little weird in the head sometimes too. And then Carl,
He was the one
yeah,
it's just Harper that Mickey Jr., the one that looked like a stone everyone called him a stone pit bull. I mean, he always
yeah,
looked like he
so
had the
yeah,
kind of like a more almond-eyed type of
yeah,
dog. Yeah, I do remember him. Yeah. Okay, interesting.
yeah.
So go on
The
as
hips
far as
are.
other things that would wash
I
out.
might consider using a dog if they're borderline, or maybe mild like Harper was, but anything above that, not going to use. Um, I will consider, like, I very rarely have a dog that doesn't pass elbows. Like, I have one female that had like a grade one on one elbow, and taking everything else into account, we used her because she's clear of everything. Her hips were fine. She's a show champion. Um, but let's see, like a rye jaw that has to go. Um, and just a wanky structure. If you get a funky front end or anything funky in the rear, and there's like no point in using that. Like, why would you mix that back in if you have, a bunch of other dogs who would look perfectly good? So, I mean,
Yeah, I think that's hitting the nail on the head though, because I think I've seen the extremes and people are full of extremes. So I've seen people that I've known in the breed for a long time, maybe not quote unquote breeders, maybe had the idea of wanting to breed, but they were always waiting for the perfect dog. It was like they just could never get to the perfect dog, so they never tried anything. And then inversely, you can get yourself to where you're so gun ho on breeding that, and you just like you said, you have the ability to keep a good bit of dogs. So why bother? Because I could go to the next, to the next better dog or what's available. But I think some people get so gun ho in breeding that they're willing to overlook a lot of things, and they're almost because they don't have any other options. They're like, well, let's just get this thing going. We're going to start with this and let's roll with it. And then obviously, it's harder to come out of that well because it's much deeper. You've already touched on the fact that Frosty
yeah.
had HUU, which is new to both of us, as far as being able to test for it or coming up, which has all affected my yard as well. So now, you start to stack up all these variants and maneuvering through that becomes more difficult. When if you do the Frosty breeding moving forward, would you then test all the pups so who's potentially a carrier of what variant? And would that sway your decision, or are you just going to pick the pup
I
and
have
and
not
see what
done
they have
that
in the
so
end?
far. I usually just go with the one I like and deal with it later and just hope. But if it was a small litter, I probably would. Just because it does get to be a pain in the butt when you have multiple carriers of the same things, and you have to kind of wind your way through who can go with who and that sort of thing, so you don't end up with any affected puppies. But like the HUU is one of those things that, like, we didn't know for years what it was. And now looking back, I was like, occasionally you get a puppy with cloudy urine, I'd be like, well, that's weird, but it never bothered them, and they went on to be perfectly fine. In fact, Nomad's sister Sybil, both Cannonball and Padre carried HUU, and she's affected. Well, she's never had an issue in eight. I mean, she's 8 years old now. So, and but then on the other hand, we had Cannonball. We didn't know Freddie carried it, and we didn't know Cannonball carried it and bred them. And there's a male out of that litter who had significant issues with the HUU. And it was right as the testing was coming out. So I ended up being like, yeah, because she was explaining to me what was going on. I was like, I'm going to send you this test and you send it off and we'll figure it out. So now that they know, they can manage it better. But it's just one of those weird ones that sometimes it'll affect them, but most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah, I feel like every time I use Embark now, I get more information back, and I just don't know if that's just because they're getting more data collected or, or what. I actually had one come back, more recently than not. It was clear of all the breed variants, but then they said, "Well, this dog's, um,
Oh, yeah.
predisposed to mast cell tumor." So that was something new for me, which ironically enough, looking back at it, we just lost her
Mm.
grandmother, and she was a lumpy dog, and, she, essentially, the short story is she ended up dying of, one of the side effects or parts of the disease, which was a thinning intestine. She actually died of a perforated, small intestine that couldn't be repaired, but it wasn't from anything that she ate. It was just due to the disease itself, and I guess that's part of its thinning intestines. So, yeah, I think, you know, it's great to have more information, but in some respects, it can become a little more daunting, and, you know, you never wanna create unhealthy animals. I mean, I think that any good breeder is gonna keep that as a baseline, but health testing is definitely a tool. Just because you
Yeah.
have carriers doesn't mean that you shouldn't breed them, especially with the breed variants. But you do have to navigate differently. I have tested some litters because I've been, for one reason or another, I just won't shake NCL from my program. So we have done some testing with litters, and I've had one litter of 7 pups with 1 NCL carrier and 1 not, that all of them were clear except 1, and then I did another one that was, another breeding that was an NCL carrier to not,
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
6 of the puppies were carriers, so it didn't really matter what I kept. So I couldn't avoid it, and I picked the best dog from both, and I still love both dogs, and I wanna use them more, but, again, you just start taking accountability
Yeah,
of,
I mean,
you know,
if it was
how
something
you're
like
gonna navigate
NCL,
around it.
definitely I would be testing everything for that. But we've been lucky enough to
Oh, yeah.
somehow dodged that bullet and never had anything show up here. But the yeah we see the ick in the HUU, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, and, there's some people out there that get into breeding and don't really either haven't been taught or shown to do the
Yeah.
health testing and end up learning a hard lesson. I mean, maybe even a couple times, you know? Okay, so let's talk about, so your family is kind of built around dogs. Your husband's a trainer. He's
Hmm.
also a breeder of German shepherds, and that was he doing that when you
Oh yeah,
guys
he's
met?
been
Was he
in
already doing this
dogs and German
professionally?
shepherds and the Schutzen since he was like 16. So he had a long history of dogs, and we just kind of it's actually a good thing that we have different breeds. And you see people who come into it with the same breed and you end up with a lot of head butting on ideas and stuff. But with the two different breeds, it ends up being a lot easier in a relationship.
Yeah, and clearly you guys have kept the separation of the programs because I don't, and just for my own kind of, when I think about Gunslinger Kennels, I don't know that I think about Richard being involved in it. You've really been the face of it, albeit, I mean, because you live in that world of working dogs
Oh
and you're
yeah.
working them regularly. Obviously, there's some crossover with the training aspects of it. Um, does he, because he's been more, I mean, obviously he's now 20 years into American Bulldogs almost, but does he have a different opinion as far as where the training temperament comes with in your breed versus his? Does that change the way that maybe you put dogs together for that
Um,
workability? Does that make sense? Like, because he's doing the shepherds and
They
maybe they work from a different place that he
yeah, at
recognizes
this
that and
point,
says, "Don't cross over to this."
he's trained enough bulldogs that they are different. So we're one of the few places you can go. I mean, we have lots of breeds that train with us, and they all work a little bit differently. So he recognizes that, and we do start them differently. And there's some crossover, but we do take into account this is a bulldog, and you don't do the certain things sometimes you do with a shepherd or a Doberman. But obviously, my selection and breeding has moved towards dogs that are able to think, that are smart, that have the drive, they can think when they're in drive, which is something a lot of bulldogs struggle with. They get into that red zone of fighting or aggression or whatever, and there's no brain function there anymore. But still keep that bulldog part of them. They're just a little bit smarter.
Yeah, I mean, I even noticed that kinda temperament even just in some of my blood in the kennels. Just I mean, some dogs are real easy in a kennel and, they'll move around and stuff, but then other ones, they just are so manic that they get to that point where you're out there to feed and they're just seeing red, and you kinda gotta let them
Mhm.
out just to let them like, diffuse a little bit and reset because they're just go, 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 go. I
Yep.
probably have some dogs that probably run 20 miles a day on their own and just yeah,
Yeah.
it's insanity. You go out there and they're just like,
I,
"Argh," their eyes are wide open and, um, what what is what is the difference between you mentioned starting a bulldog puppy may be different than a shepherd or a Doberman. Explain to me what that means or
I
what that looks
can
like.
usually, I mean, like people always talk about maturity, the fastness of maturity. Like, a shepherd or a Malinois, you can take them out at, 6, 8 weeks old, and they'll be biting and barking, et cetera, et cetera. Like the Bulldogs, yeah, you can take them out there with a flirt pole and they're going to bite it. But you have to be very conscious that you need to get them barking for the sport that we do. And sometimes, Bulldogs just lock into prey. And when they're locked into prey, they aren't going to bark. So that's our main focus when we start out with, like, yeah, we've got
Hmm.
them biting, but as soon as we get them biting, it's like, okay, we got to get them barking. So there are a couple different ways to do that. You put them behind a fence and dogs get frustrated and they bite behind the fence, and that way you can reward it and click it and mark the behavior. But then sometimes you end up with the bulldogs, you have to put them on the table and piss them off a little bit and get them frustrated to bark. But it's usually more of issue, not like an issue, but you just have to be conscious of it with the bulldogs. You don't want to keep training them just straight and pray with them not barking, or you're going to have big trouble getting out of it, as they mature.
Yeah, and that's really you're saying that with only within the context of a sport dog that they would have to bark and mark at the blinds, and yeah, and I noticed that too. I think a bulldog I think part of their intention is to bark if there's like, that watchdog mentality. But I don't know that when I'm out like really busting ass and trying to work a dog, that barking is part of that. So that's interesting to understand. Is there anything else that's different between starting maybe an American
I'll have to
bulldog and
think
now
about it.
working versus
I mean,
a
there is
different breed?
which I touched on before, is just be patient. You know, like at this point, I know, you know, pretty much is going to be in there. But, I've identified the ones that I'm keeping. Like a good example would be Legion. He was just a monster as a puppy, and then from like 5 months till about 11ish months, it was like, "Are you a dud?" And then I took him out at 11 months, and it was like the monster was back. So I think it's just more. You have to have more of a patience game.
Do you find that there's a threshold on like when would you think that an American bulldog is mentally mature?
It depends sometimes, but once you hit a year, you can usually really start getting into that obedience. So, that's why I might do a little bit with puppies. Like back in the day, I did, but I don't anymore. I just let them kind of grow up, and definitely, 18 months or so to 2 years, you can really get that. They're having to start doing some power thinking and training and learning things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think for me, I've always thought that the breed mentally matures fairly early. I feel that year. I mean, really, by a year, you if even if you're the average pet owner, your dog should be pretty
Yeah.
dialed in. Now, if you had a boxer or something,
Oh, yeah.
but
They're still kind of goobers sometimes. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I mean, as far as a functional
Oh yeah.
animal that can knows the ways of the world, I think mentally mature. I've had a boxer and I think at 3, she was still as puppy-like as they come. So, I I think it's important to point out that the learning age of American Bulldog for me is very young. I think you can
Oh
even
yeah,
start doing stuff at 6, 7 weeks and really imprint these dogs. But for your purpose, and I think it's important for people to understand the pet people because there is some value in that. Now for your purpose, what you're trying to do, uh, again, overworking them at a young age will work for general lifestyle, but as far as like getting out there and doing the support work, it starts to maybe weigh them
yeah,
down mentally with being overworked. But I think if anybody puts their real due diligence into an average dog, I think, an American Bulldog, I think if you really spend 15 minutes a
oh
day
yeah,
for the
yeah.
first 6
I mean,
months,
like
that dog's dialed
even
in by
the
the
puppies
time
I
they're a
raised in the
year
house to do
for
sport, they're,
sure.
you know, your house broken, you're not surfing on counters, you learn basic manners in life. And you could do a lot with the puppy if you're not planning on, and even not planning on going and doing sport, but even if you're like, if you've done it before and you've raised enough puppies, not to like run them into the ground. It's just people who have not really, raised a sport dog or have come through it with another breed and are switching over. And it's like you just don't run them into the dirt. By the time you get to the point where you're actually going to start doing stuff, they're just kind of like, "Fuck this," not this shit again.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a point to it too, and I don't even know for the little bit of stuff that I've done. There's just some nights you come home from work and you're like, "All right, I'm gonna set aside this 10 minutes to do XYZ with this pup tonight and kind of get past this hurdle that we've been working on." And if you get frustrated,
Yeah,
it always leads to a bad outcome. I mean, if you're frustrated going into the thing and the pup's not doing what you want. I mean, some pups I've had that literally you could teach them something in a matter of 2 minutes and they learned it forever. And then there's obviously the other pups that you are just banging your head against the wall to try to get them to figure out anything. But if you're frustrated, it's obviously going to go right down the leash and it's never going to lead to a good outcome. And I think first and foremost, the best method is to keep a good relationship, working relationship with that dog, because until you can establish their threshold on what we'll call a punishment, you don't want to cross that line and really stipend an animal, which I think is tough for the average pet owner because I think a lot of people want to say that dog training is cookie cutter, and you see a lot of these dog training people out there with a myriad of methods, and I don't think that any one method is good enough. I mean, you kind of have to just be fluid with the animal that's in front of you in order to get the results that you're looking for. Um, it seems to me, and I know we've put some precedents on the females as far as breeding is concerned, but
yeah.
clearly you enjoy working the males more than the females. What's the biggest difference between trying to get a female out there
I've had a couple
versus a
of
male?
nice, hardworking females, Zoe being one, and for whatever reason, we just could never get her bred. And then Cannonball was one I put a lot of time into also, but, I ended up being disappointed in her working career when it came down to it. Um, if I could only have a male or a female dog, I'd have males. I just like them, they're big, they're usually, they're impressive looking animals. I love my females. They're super, super important to the breeding program. Um, I like for them to be able to go to shows and do well. It'd be nice, sometimes it's nice to take a female out and train her, but you're always running into the heat cycle, which is a pain in the ass. And people are always like, well, that doesn't affect my females. Well, like literally it affects, in 95% of females. I mean, Cannonball would forget how to run blinds when she was coming into heat. It's just a pain in the ass. And I see, a lot of people really love to train females, but still they run into the heat cycle issue. And even if they don't get funky in training, you have to wait to be last on the field if you're trialing a female in heat. And the Bulldogs you can't show them in heat. Other breeds you can, but it just comes down to a preference thing for me. I enjoy training the males. I pick females out, and they're structurally good, temperament's there, show them what have you, and they better be a good mom, or that's it. One of their most important things to do is to pass on the genetics and be a super good mom, and raise puppies till 4 or 5 weeks old, and not be weird around them, show the give them a good structure going into, growing up. And I think that's where I find it's one of the most important jobs if you have a kennel, is being the mother to the next generation.
Yeah. Now, do you a couple things there. So, do you if you're not really picking your females per se on their working ability, does it then would you say your priority is their temperament and then their structure to
I
kinda
do
move the
choose.
thing moving
I do choose
forward?
based on drive too.
Assuming yeah, okay. And then as far as whelping and being a good mother, what have you experienced on let's say on the not so fun side of breeding as far as when you claim that a female is not a good mother? What does
It
that
hasn't
look
been as
like for
much of
you
an
in the
issue with
past?
the bulldogs. We've had issue with German shepherds in the past. With the bulldogs, you get the ones that are I had a couple just that are just rough on the puppies. We see that a lot in the German shepherds. They don't pay attention to where they're stepping. They just get up and all the puppies go flying. But like I had one female. It was Bacchus's mom, and it wasn't anything to do with her temperament. She was a good mom, but she stalled out in labor, had to go get a C-section, and then it was just a battle with mastitis, like insane battle with it for like 4 weeks, and it was freaking miserable for everyone. I'm up feeding puppies. I have to give her, her antibiotics so her fever would go down enough so she would eat, and it was just every day. I mean, she was like on the max of Clavamox the vet said you could give him, and I was even adding injectable penicillin to it, and we just couldn't knock it out. So after all that went down, I was like, I'm just not going to breed her again. It was just a headache. I have to put aside like 6 weeks of not doing anything else in case it went to shit again. So, and then she ended up with Pio, and we spayed her. So never bred her again. And then Sally, which we bred last year. It was her first litter, and it was the first time I had a female dog. Like usually, when bulldogs start having their puppies, they're like, "I'm staying here. These are my puppies." And you have to take their puppies away to get them to get up. They don't want to get up. And she like had 3 or 4 puppies, and still she was like, "I'm out of here. I'm leaving." It's like, I don't know what you're gonna do with them, but I'm not taking care of them. And so yeah, so I kept her in a
Oh,
crate in the
no.
house for the first couple of weeks, and which was good because it made her sit there and nurse the puppies. Because when I moved them out to the puppy building where she has more room to get up, she was like, "I'm not feeding them anymore." And then she got mastitis because she just refused to feed them. I was like, "Well, you might be washed from the program," which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because like come from a long line of superior mothers, and you get one fruitcake in the bunch.
Yeah, it doesn't take long, well, how should I phrase this? If you have what you described in that first scenario where, you know, mom stalls out, okay, you gotta go get a C-section, sucks, but whatever. Um, you get back, got the pups, everybody's doing okay, and then you
Yes.
start dealing with medical issues with the female. I tell you what, that'll burn a memory into your brain faster than anything. I just went through this with my last litter, and I had such PTSD over it that I questioned even breeding another dog again. But and for sure not breeding that dog again. It was just so hard on her. I mean, just physically was hard on her. Didn't have mastitis or anything, but yeah, just was having infections after initially it was like almost instantaneous infection at the wound, and then eh, just everything. It just sucked. I mean, it took a long time to get that dog back to square, feeling like where I felt that she was back to 100% physically, and that's scary because first and foremost, I'm not
No,
breeding a
no.
dog to sacrifice the mother in any way, shape, or form. I'll sacrifice a litter before I sacrifice a mother. Um, but, yeah, it's tough too because, I mean, it's just like any breeder, typically you get a female to the point where you're like, "Okay, this dog's made the cut, I'm gonna breed her," and then you typically have another breeding at least plan behind that you're like, "Well, I wanna try this, and then I wanna see what happens with this," and then when you can't get to that second move, it kinda shuffles the deck a little bit with what your plans were moving forward. Um, and, as much as I always say it's great to have a plan
Yeah.
with breeding, that plan's gonna change. Like, it's inevitable that plan's gonna change because things are not gonna turn out. And I remember when I first got into it, I was adamant about, like, having something from every breeding and making sure that it turned out, and, at some point, you do enough
Yeah.
breedings and you say, well, that just didn't work for me. There's really no reason to go back to that. Or you used a male a couple times on a couple different scenarios, and you really didn't love what you saw, and you're like, you know what? I'm just going to have to let that go. And you eventually get to a point where you have quite a few different things going on anyway. So it really isn't truly impactful.
Mm.
I think it's more of an ego thing or just a pride thing at some point. But
Yeah.
you just kinda have to let things go when they don't work out. We always want them to work out, but they don't always work out. Um, okay. So, let's go back, and when you talk about a notable breeding or a breeding that we refer to as, quote, unquote, "clicked," um, what has the trend been that you see in those breedings that you think, looking back at them, made them click more than maybe
We
some
had the
others?
Blizzard pumpkin breeding that produced Risa, and as I said before, they're very similar in type, and then Risa was similar. She's was not quite as refined looking female as Pumpkin was, but she was a little more rougher around the edges. And then, but everything coming down from her, like she had, I think she only I've counted it out before. From her first litter, only two survived. Her second litter, I think there were six or seven. Third was one, and the last one was six or seven again. So there weren't that many puppies from four litters. And out of that, we had multiple grand champions. We had Pusher, who's a Supreme Grand Champion and two times national champion. And obviously, through her and to him, he kind of goes a throwback a little bit to looking like Blizzard but with a better rear end on him. So he's been a huge part of our program coming down, especially in that he produced Roman, and then the Roland Tally litter. That was just completely out there, scatterbred. They were both big dogs. Like Tally was, people would think she was a male when she was in the champion ring. They'd be like, come back there like, where are her balls? But sorry, my cat in my lap. Um, that first breeding with
No, you're
them
fine.
produced Padre, which was, funny that I kept him because he was the smallest male out of the litter, but he was, in his prime, he was like 90-ish pounds, 95 pounds, and just a super working dog. And then out of those two litters, you ended up with three IGP titled dogs, which, in bulldogs, especially in the US, you just don't see that a lot. And so Padre ended up being a huge, obviously he's Pusher's dad, and then sire to a good number of our other dogs. And then here recently, the female that I didn't show because she was coming along in COVID, and she's a pretty little female. Her name is Penny, and she is out of Legion and Sybil, which is Nomad's sister, and we've bred her to Roman, which is a grandfather granddaughter breeding, which produced Spike and Cordelia. Which Spike is just, I mean, he's not as refined, obviously not as refined as Bacchus. I say Bacchus is like Marky Mark, or he like plays soccer, and Spike like plays rugby. He's just like this brute of a dog. Um, and then I bred her a second time because Pusher is getting older, and I just, I'd had to neuter Roman. I didn't really have a male that I was super happy about. Um, Out of Pusher right now, I just wanted to get some more things out of him, so I bred Penny to Pusher, and we ended up with two little females that are just super pretty. That's little Percy and Philly. So they're just turning a year soon. So hopefully we'll get them out showing this next year. Um, so those are probably some of the ones that really just clicked the most. And like you do some breedings thinking like this is going to be awesome. Like, I mean, I know you have too, and most breeders who've bred, a good number of times, and then the puppies grow up, and you're like, well, this is just a pile of shit, know. And then you just,
Yeah, yeah. I put 2 dogs together, and in my mind,
Yeah.
this was gonna be, the next level breeding,
Yeah.
probably one of the most disappointing breedings I ever did as far as the end result. Some nice dogs in the litter, and I can't take away from that, but, yeah, just everything behind the
Hmm.
scenes, it didn't click, like, it didn't. It on paper, it should have phenotype to phenotype, it should have been perfect, and it was just all over the
Yeah.
place, and
Yeah.
I
We've
was
all
like,
been
"Oh,
there.
okay." Not doing that again. Yeah. Yeah, not doing that again, and, yeah, I tried using that male again in another scenario. I wasn't super excited about that. Now, I used that male 3 times, and one of the 3 times I was thoroughly impressed. Like, I was across the board, I was very, very happy, even from a young age with the pups. Now, even as an adult, all the dogs are adult age, and that litter turned out. So, again, it's like, I know people talk about, like, there's a science to breeding, there's an art to breeding, and, sometimes you might try something, doesn't quite work out. You might try it again, maybe a little better, but not so great. And then, maybe the third time or the second of the 3 times
Yeah.
really turns
And that's
out, and you're
another
like, wow,
mistake
why did
people
that,
make. You know,
you
you
know what
get
I
these
mean?
people who are like,
Like,
"Oh, I have this
yeah,
great
and
dog. I'm gonna breed him once, and I'm gonna get the next great dog." And then when it doesn't happen, they're like, "Oh, he's just a shit producer, or she's just a shit producer. I'm gonna move on to something else." It's like, no, you gotta try a couple of different things. You know, you can't just scratch them out. One
yeah.
time if you didn't like what came out of it. Which if I had done that with Roland, I wouldn't have the program that I have today. I like the dog, and I just was going to give it a couple of tries, a couple of different ways, and finally ended up hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, and then then once you do get that aha litter, then you really got to sit around and
Yeah.
evaluate, like, what got me to this? Why did it work this time? What was the combination? And then, the next step is, how do you figure out how to do it again with them? Um, because sometimes I think I've done a breeding that really clicked, and then I'm like, okay, then you jump down a generation with the offspring, and you're like, oh,
Hmm.
I'll put that back together in this way because it clicked so well the first time, and it doesn't always work the second time as well. I mean, there's obviously a little bit more to take into consideration with genetics, but yeah, it is a tough puzzle. I mean, the puzzle is not easy. I don't think there's anybody that can tell you that,
Yeah.
you can get to it by just follow this path. It's going to lead you there, because it won't. But you can, for me, I try to study pedigrees and see, especially with people that have a phenotype that's very identifiable. I try to look at their breeding plan and then see how they got there. Unfortunately, some of the people that have gotten to a very distinguishable phenotype maybe didn't do the testing along the way, so they gained one
Yeah.
goal and then have a lot of problems on the backside. But they definitely created a dog that's identifiable. I was trying to think about, um, well, let's go back to the whelping thing. So, one thing I've noticed with you that's a little interesting is that you
Yeah.
have utilized a crate for whelping. Was that during the whelping process, or is that just like post production, if you will? Is that like, oh, we're done whelping, the pups are out, and you're utilizing the crate? Because to me, it just seems like a very tight space. And I know you're using a big crate, but I'm like, man, is this just for
um
feeding, or is this like the full
Sometimes
deal,
when I
or
use it
what?
is when there's somebody occupying the puppy building, and like back in the day, we had our house is not huge, and we'd have whelping box in the extra bedroom, but that's where our daughter lives now, so we don't have that anymore. um it actually works really well. I don't think it would work well with the German shepherds. The Richard did keep his gerbils in a crate for a while with their mom. But the smaller crate, obviously you can't use it with a huge female, but like, my females on average are 65-ish, 70 pounds. And it's good, I like in the beginning, because it's in the house. Our puppy building is, it's not far away, but still I have to walk out there and check on them. And, it's a lot more convenient when you hear somebody squawk and you can just walk into the other room. And Bulldog moms are such that, obviously when they're whelping, sometimes they're a little bit, moving and digging around and stuff. But a lot of the times, mine will thankfully just, lay there and, have the puppies not make a huge deal about it. So, obviously I'm there throughout all of that, making sure nobody gets twisted up and whatever. And then I'm a real stickler with them about digging once the puppies are here and I get everything cleaned up and straightened out. And most of my moms, as I said before, that you have to like pry them out away from their puppies. So it's
Yep.
worked out really well. I mean, it once they get a little bigger, sometimes they'll go that giant, enormous crate, but that thing's a pain in the butt. But like 2 weeks in there, it's good because the puppies can't get too far away from her. It keeps them all together, and then that's Bacchus. And then once they're going in, getting close to the third or fourth week, obviously they need more space, but they're able to toddle around now and find things. So it's actually it turned out to be a pretty good tool.
Hmm. I've never thought about doing that. I think I would. I guess my main concern would, I guess, just
Yeah.
be a sloppy mother just laying on them or being a nitwit and stepping on them, getting wound up about something. Um, i- do you find that the standard dogs that you've had more success? Obviously, you're not a bully breeder, so you probably don't have a ton of experience. But would you say your rule of thumb is that the standard females uh, have a tendency to whelp a little better, as far as unassisted? Are you somebody that's kind of sitting reading a book, watching your litter happen, and you're kind of intervening, or are you kind of letting mom do the whole thing with just some general,
I'm
awareness and
usually
monitoring?
there every time the puppy's born, just making sure it gets out of the sack and gets going and drying them off and like disinfecting the cord and stuff like that. So I am usually there. I mean, I've had a couple over the years just like sneak out and have an early litter. You walk out the next morning and they have, like 7 to 9 puppies. And they're like, oh, we're all good. I'm like, well, thank God. But no, I mean, we've all
Yeah,
had,
yeah. Do you what about do you typically let the mom
if
get them
they're
out of the
like
sack, or do you
right
typically
there
do
really
that
good
yourself?
about it, I'll let them start. But I'm usually right there helping if they hesitate for any minute.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of letting the female, because a lot of times I just feel
Yeah.
like they start to jerk, and then you end up with those hernias, and I'm like, "You know what? This really isn't that important to me." Like, I usually just try
Yeah.
to get them out of the sack, get everything squared up, and then I give them right back to them to clean up, and then try to get them latched on instantly. But, yeah, I've only had one instance where, a female had whelped on her own, and it
Ah,
was mostly because I didn't think she was pregnant. One of those fun accidental litters, that and I knew that he had gotten access to her when she was in heat, but I didn't, I watched her, and of course it was Sugar, and Sugar's like that good old
yeah.
white trash whore that just bounces back after every litter, and, I watched her and watched, I was like, "Nah, I don't think she's pregnant." Came out to feed one morning and
Yeah.
heard puppies whining,
Yeah.
and I was
That's
like,
always a good thing to
"Oh,
look out to.
that's wonderful." But she was a pro, but and Sugar would literally sit on the couch with you and then just, like, hike a leg and
Mm.
squirt out a puppy for you and be like, "Seriously, girl? Like, right here? Like, I'm just walking, casually drops a pup off, like, oh, good." But, yeah, she was a funny puppy or a funny dog. And then any tricks of the trade that you like to do either during the whelping process or, like, post-whelp that has seemingly made an impact
Calcium is a
on
big
things
one.
moving easier for
We
you?
start soon as I see the temperature drop. And then start seeing some sort of like nesting or even just being restless. I'll start them on like 3 milliliters of calcium, either like the Calsorb you can buy, or I've even used the calcium you can buy for like cows at Tractor Supply or Southern States. And then I continue that, especially once they've really started getting restless and puppies should be within the next couple of hours, like every 3 or 4 hours, I hit them with the calcium. And then, yeah,
So you're
yeah.
doing you're doing like an
I
oral
haven't run into
paste,
any
is that what
issues
you're
like,
using? Yeah, okay.
upsetting their stomachs or anything like that. Um, I will use oxytocin, sparingly. Like I've had a couple of stuck puppies over the past couple of litters, and once you get the calcium on board, you get them up, walk them around, and you're still not making any progress. And you can feel, I mean, like you feel them, like usually they're breech or something, something wonderful like that, and they're obviously started into the canal. Then I'll use like a very small, like a 0.2 milliliter of oxytocin just to give that push a little more oomph, and we've we've been able to get them out and everybody's fine. So, avoiding any C-sections that way.
What about diet up to the point of, okay, you've bred your bitch and, typically that first maybe first half, the 45 days, I mean, you might know that she's pregnant, but do you do anything different in that second half
No, we feed
of that
from gold,
maternity
so the
period?
calcium levels are good, not outrageous. So we stick with that. I mean, once they start really looking pregnant and everything is a big layer, I'll up their food, not like dramatically, like a cup or so, maybe a little more than
Okay.
that, depending upon how big they are. But we really don't do anything. Like a couple weeks before they start, I'll start on probiotics and obviously worm them 2 weeks out. But other than that, we don't do anything crazy diet wise.
Okay, so that's the second time I've heard that. So you're actually worming your bitch,
Yep.
2 weeks prior to whelping, and
We use
what are you
Panicure.
using to worm at that point? Okay, so you're just but yeah, okay, and it's
Yeah.
typically you're gonna use
Yeah.
quite a bit with an adult, correct? If I'm thinking about that right? And then but
It's the
it's
same as
not as
safeguard. Yeah.
intrusive as, like, a
Yeah.
safeguard. It's a little easier. Oh, is it?
There's Valbazen,
Maybe
which
I'm
seems to
thinking
be
something
hard on
else.
them.
Hmm. Um, um, but you're
No,
not giving are you
no. Once
supplementing
they whelp,
vitamins or
then I
anything
start the
else along the
supplement with
way?
like
Yeah.
calcium, and I use the Revival, Oxymama, and stuff like that. And I also use, which is a little bit different,
Okay. Yeah, that's
colostrum when they're nursing. So I buy the colostrum like you would buy for
oh.
calves at Tractor Supply, and it does seem to help prevent
Mhm.
most mastitis problems. Yep.
Interesting, and you start that post-whelp almost immediately? Okay. Do you know
It
is
isn't.
it
I just
directed
end
how
up
much to
using like a
use since it's not
tablespoon every time I feed
I
them,
mean, is
something
there
like that.
and do you give them anything during the whelping process? Like, I know I've used, like, cottage cheese and ice cream mixed together just for the sugar to kinda
Yeah.
keep them give them a little "oomph," you know what I mean? And obviously introduce additional calcium. Do you do anything like that along the way or
We
just
usually
kinda
just
get
get
through
through
the
the
whelping
whelping process. I
process and then
mean,
start
and
this
then feed them right when they're done.
kind of
Like back in the day, you'd be
yeah.
before using calcium or even before having, oxytocin, you'd be looking at long ass whelps that took forever. And then, yeah, then I would, give them ice cream or see if they wanted to eat anything just because, want to keep their strength up. But these days, it's like everybody's getting out of the pool. We're not
Mhm.
waiting all this long.
So, what let me ask you,
I will let
how
it
long is your
go.
typical whelp now?
Like at 3 hours between puppies, I'm like, we're doing something.
Oh, okay, yeah, 3 hours between puppies, but I mean, the full
Not
length, are
usually
you
that
still
long.
averaging maybe 12 hours?
Mm-mm.
No? Okay. Yeah, I never seem to get those
Yeah.
quick ones. I just don't have that in my dogs don't do quick litters, I don't swear. It's all 12 hours, I mean, Annie this last time, and I know she was loaded, she had 14 pups in there, and she went the full, like, 12 hours to get 11 out, and I thought she was done, and I was palping her and seeing if I could feel anything. I wasn't totally, but she had kinda zonked out. We both took a nap, got up the next morning, and, I was cleaning box up, getting everything kind of put away, my sleeping area
Oh
and all
yeah.
that stuff, and next thing you know, I heard that, "Ugh," and she's pushing again. I was
Yeah,
like,
well, I've
"Son
had
of a
plenty of
bitch."
surprises.
And she did not have the strength to get the last 3 out, so I had to go
Yeah.
get a C-section after whelping for 12 hours, 13 hours. That sucked. Um, okay, so that's some new stuff that I mean, this is the second time I've heard about worming the bitch. Do you think that
Oh
it's
yeah. I
made
mean,
an
I
impact
these
on the
days I don't
puppies
need to
having
see any
worms?
worms anymore. Yeah.
Really? And then do you typically
Yep.
follow the standard,
Yep.
like, 2, 4, 6, 8 protocol with the pups regardless? But you're saying
I
after that
haven't seen
first
worms
worming at 2
in
weeks, you're really
anything in
not
a
seeing
long
anything?
time, like years. Like always wormed the
Hmm,
females, and then even worming the
that's interesting.
the puppies. Obviously, at 2 weeks, I haven't seen worms. Can't remember the last time.
Do you worm your adults regularly as a standard, or do you just do it like I typically don't worm my adults.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll in the spring, maybe I'll run something through them, but
I
I don't typically I don't think they really
yeah,
have access to
I just
much
give
to get worms,
ivermectin
so I
every
don't know why
month,
you would do
but
it.
I used to do it more like once a year or something, but it's been years since I've really, wormed everyone. I did this year and I didn't see anything. But I mean, we will run into like, God forbid you get freaking fleas on your yard, and that's a pain in the ass. After that, you have to worm everyone for tapeworms, but
Mhm.
it's been like a number of years since we've had a real issue with that.
Okay. Um So worming the bitch has been impactful to you. So that's interesting. I'm gonna try that. I've noticed that some dogs,
Mhm.
some of my lines don't have worms in their pups, and I don't know if that's just coincidental or not. But and then some I just know they're gonna be full of worms, but I've never wormed the bitch beforehand. Um, okay, and then that colostrum. I recently got spammed on either Facebook or Instagram from a company that does a lot of dog. It seemed like they do a lot of dog,
My
type, supplements, and they had a colostrum on there as well, um, in their own brand. So I was like, "Oh, that's kinda interesting," and I was thinking, well, maybe it's, to use with the puppies, but, it seems like you could use it for your female as well, and you think
Yeah,
that
it has.
that's
I mean,
helped
there's
cut
some that
down
are
on
still going to get it,
mastitis?
but I've had females who just every single litter they've gotten it. It's just been a pain in the butt. And then I started using that, and they had litters and never had an issue with it. So,
So when you have your puppy building, and let's say it's not occupied, and you have your typical whelping scenario where it's just the one dog. What is uh, what's the substrate that you
um,
use in that box with the female?
if it's out in
Is
the
it just
puppy
like
building these
blankets
days, we'll
or
use straw, which has been, we started doing that a couple of years ago. And actually, the German Shepherd puppies will use straw throughout their puppyhood. But with the Bulldogs, I just use it when they're whelping, and I like it because you can move the wet stuff away, keep it drier, that they can't bunch it up and like squish puppies. They can dig, but it's not gonna like be like a blanket and get all tangled. And we've been lucky because we have
yeah.
relationships with farmers around here, and they usually have really nice clean straw. So we have.
Yeah, that's where I question is like I always question. I haven't had mastitis a lot. And I always wonder if it was a substrate thing. Like when I see,
Yeah.
if people are using shavings or something along that line, even through the whelping process and even immediately post whelp, if that's a contributing factor to maybe
Yeah.
uh, s- something getting around the nipple
It just
or
seems to be a
scratching them
bulldog thing. I
and
mean,
causing
the
some
German
type of
shepherds
infection. But
never
I was
get it, and the bulldogs.
it yeah, well, German shepherds would also survive in the wild. I'm
But
not sure
yeah, I
that all
mean, mine are
bulldogs
usually on
would.
blankets, so, and like I change them twice a day, no matter
Yeah,
what, and wash, clean them if they go
yeah.
outside, and it's just I don't know if it's a letdown issue or what, but they are prone to it.
Yeah, yeah, knock on wood, hopefully that's not in my near future. Um, how much have you always when you breed your dogs, have you always subsided to a
Oh
live
yeah,
tie? Is that your preferred method? And is there any recourse if for whatever reason a male or a female can't live tie? Would you if you tried to get a breeding done and for whatever reason you couldn't get a live tie, would you would you move to doing an AI or would you just say this isn't meant to
Usually we
be?
get a lot of time, but in the past, when we haven't been able to get one on certain breedings, we've just, I've said, obviously we can't get it done. I'm not going to do AI, and I do regret a couple of those. There are a couple I wish I had followed through with and done progesterone and AI or whatever. But generally speaking, we are able to get a live tie. And I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a rodeo, but especially when you got some of those angry bitches. But we usually get it done.
Yeah, I've wrestled a few dogs during breeding. I mean, you almost kind of like part of you feels a little guilty. I don't know that I would ever subside to, like, a breeding
Yeah.
stand where, like, we joke around and call it the rape stand, but, I mean, it's not if you got a couple people holding the female to get a male
No.
onto her, I mean, it's not too far-fetched to say it's about the same thing, but, and I don't understand it, like, do you think there's anything with that as far as, like, the bitch is so angry she doesn't want to be dominated by a dog on her back, that's some type of
Oh no.
nature telling you it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've done it, and I mean, the litters are fucking phenomenal, and I can't discount the litters, but, I remember breeding Jamaica. First litter was the first time I bred her to Prophet, and Prophet could tie a wild boar. I mean, he doesn't care. He's all in. He doesn't care if they're trying to eat
Yeah.
his face or not. He's like, this is going to happen. And she was just adamant that it wasn't. We got it done. And then the next breeding I did with her to Ghost, she was the same way. And he was more sensitive. So he was like, oh, I'm sorry. I won't do this. And I was like, fucking get up here, dude. Get your shit done. And then by the third breeding, when I did with her,
Yeah.
was the Rico, and that was her most accepting litter, like, or most accepting breeding thing. So I don't know if it was just she figured it out or what the reasoning was. Now, two of those litters were really outstanding. The the middle one with Ghost, I don't know that I would hang my hat on, but there were some really nice dogs that came out of there. The male that I kept, unfortunately, we lost early due an obstruction where I had placed him, and then the female that I kept, she's still around. I'm not sure that I love her rear end conformation, so I don't know that we'll use her because I got some other stuff off her that was a little nicer, but and I think that's kind of goes back to that mentality initially where you're like, oh, I got to have something turn out from every litter. And yes, it's nice, but sometimes like you just kind of got to let nature take its course and say, you know what, I'm going to use this dog in a different way. And if I get something that's better off of that breeding, it seems like it would make more sense just to use those dogs versus trying to force feed something that was maybe a little
Yeah.
more mediocre just to try something, I guess. Um, have you ever just subsided to what I'll call like, let's just try it breeding? You know what I mean? Like you're like, I'm just maybe we put these two together and see what we get out of it versus like, oh, I want to put this dog with this dog because of a pedigree, or I want to put this dog with this dog because it's workability, um, or something along that line. Have you ever just tried to throw the dart and see what
I'd
happens?
say they're
Have they
rigidly
all been
planned, but
really
they're
rigidly
all, I mean, they've
planned?
all been, planned, based on something.
Have you ever taken the mentality of like, I want to use this dog to correct that dog, or has it always been these two dogs have
I mean, you
everything, I want
definitely
to
have
put
things
these
like
two
when
dogs together?
the first female I got, Xana, she had like no eye pigment. She finally ended up with maybe a fourth of one eye, like lid had pigment. So that was a big issue to get rid. It's hard to get rid of. So you really had, yeah, poor pigment. It's hard to
As
get
far as
that
poor
back. It
pigment?
takes generations and still it pops up. So, you're breeding a dog with a little less than, stellar pigment. We
What
obviously would look at the pigment and make sure that's there. But I mean, it's not like we're gonna breed a subpar dog just because it had some good pigment or something like that. But we do take certain traits into consideration and what to breed them to kind of balance it out.